Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Wells. I'm the host of Go Ask Your Mothers, the podcast. Does anyone else feel like they are a car whose wheels have fallen off in January of 2025? It has been awfully hard to get things going around here and a challenging one to say the least. Let's talk about it. Let's go.
Welcome to Go Ask Your Mothers, the podcast where motherhood meets advocacy and culture. I'm Sarah Wells, mom to two, CEO, and champion for working parents. Here to break down the headlines, share viral moments, and deliver the tips every mom needs. Let's get to it.
What a start it has been to the new year. Some of you, like myself, live in areas that have had tremendously challenging weather to start the year off, meaning lots of snow days and delays and bad traffic and commutes, let alone sick kids. Who else has sick kids? So I have another one this week with a fever. Oh my goodness, the working parent juggle has been the hardest ever, and my heart goes out to all of you. And unless you've been hiding under a rock, you've probably seen the news about all sorts of policies that support women and working mothers and working families being rolled back or altogether eliminated. It's been so worrisome. And so I wanted to talk about this and just jump in, starting off with the mother of all headlines. It is all about what's going on in the federal government right now. I know you've probably maybe turned the news off a few times or stopped the doom scroll because it's just been an overwhelming amount of negativity and bad, scary things happening for initiatives that so many of us care about. You know, who's impacted by these? It's still so new. It's hard to know how a lot of these executive orders and things going on are going to roll out for all of us across the country. But certainly it's going to be a huge impact on our working mom friends in the public sector with return to office mandates, with various DE&I and anti-discrimination laws and policies and initiatives rolling back. I think the thing that I want to focus on without being toxic positive, but I'd like to be the bearer of some good news or progress for you, is don't forget that private employers still, for the most part, can pretty much do whatever they want, which means that you can still ask for and get the working mom support that you need. And in fact, at the end of this episode, I'm going to give you and my mom hacks and facts, some best practices on how to work with your employer to get that support that you need. Despite the legitimate fears about what's going to happen next coming out of Washington, D.C., which is, by the way, my backyard here, I want to also remind you that there are no federal laws that are prohibiting employers from offering you paid leave, from giving you flexible work options. And a little side note on that, even if you have a return to office mandate, this is something I want to talk about. I could dedicate a whole episode to this. Even in a return to office, full-time, no remote work, you can still be offered flexibility. What do I mean by that? You could still be given the opportunity to take time off to go to medical appointments, to see your kid in their school play, to have a flex schedule in the summer that enables you to consolidate to 4 days a week and have a Friday off. You can still have a flex start and end to your workday. There can still be all sorts of flexibility built in, even in a return to office mandate. So I know that moms most often overwhelmingly want to have a choice whether they can work remotely or not in the position or industry where that obviously makes sense, because some positions just don't. But even in that mandated situation, employers can still be flexible. So let's hold them to that. And strong lactation accommodations. Talk about this again, as I mentioned at the very end, but you can still be offered a great, clean place to pump, even if the federal government is rolling back other public policies. So I think that while some employers may not be required to do all of this, either now or in the future, I think it's important to remember that your employer, to be competitive as a business that attracts and hires amazing working moms like yourself, can still offer these, and the best employers will. Companies are also still hiring. Don't forget that working moms make up such a tremendous amount of the workforce, and they are going to want and need and should push employers to meet our needs. So again, later in the show, I'll share some practical strategies on how you can actually do this. But in the meantime, for those of you who are feeling just totally overwhelmed by all of the stuff going on in the media and all of the fear that you have in protecting some of our most vulnerable populations, and of course, even your own interests as a working parent, I have a couple of suggestions for you. Look to state level advocacy. My first two episodes of this podcast, I actually focused on both California and New York and what they were doing to move forward in paid leave and lactation support. States are emerging forward as being the leaders in this area right now. There are states across the nation that are looking at introducing more robust paid leave, strengthening childcare access, and again, supporting breastfeeding parents. So figure out who your state legislators are, figure out who you need to advocate for in your state, check out what the state laws are, and you may actually find some protection either already on the books or in the works that you didn't know about before, regardless of what the federal government is or is not doing. And then, of course, I'm always going to say support amazing organizations that are fighting for working moms and lactating persons. So, for instance, Moms Rising, one of my favorite, Moms Rising, go follow them. They're doing a ton of work on paid leave, and they also support lactation justice as well. And then speaking of lactation justice, long time favorite of mine is Breastfeed LA. So I will link up both of these in the show notes. And these are organizations that you can follow and get involved with. And I really, now is a call to action more than ever. Push on your states, push on your employers, join the organizations, don't give up. Figure out where you can make your voice heard, tell your story. It's so powerful. And don't let the negative news get you down every day. Turn it off when you need to turn it off. But also know that there is still a lot of room to get what it is that you need as a working mom. Oh, I started so heavy in the topics this week. I mean, it is what it is, right? And isn't it ironic that I told you at the very beginning of the show, I felt like my wheels were falling off because while I've been sitting here, for those of you who are watching me on YouTube, the arm on the brand new office chair I just put together and probably spent like 3 hours of time that I don't have as a working mom assembling. Clearly, I did a not so great job because the entire arm of my chair just fell off. So literally my wheels are falling off. But you know what? We need some levity around here. So let's talk about something fun. And I love in this Mom's Gone Viral to talk about viral reels. I'm actually going to look to myself this week. I still have a reel that I posted last summer that for whatever reason just increased a level of curiosity around breastfeeding that I just never knew existed on the internet. And that is, if you haven't seen it, it is my reel about having ghost boobies. What do I mean by ghost boobies? Well, I was just like sitting with my kids in the sand and I had again one of those like tingling sensations in my breasts that lactating moms get after they're done lactating, well after. Like I actually on that reel, somebody I think said they were 60 and they still feel it. So a baby cries or like just something triggers the feeling that you get typically before a letdown. And it's so interesting. My oldest is 13 and my youngest is 9. It's been a long time since I was breastfeeding and I still get this ghost boobie is what I was calling it feeling. And it's so funny because I can't tell you just that the hundreds of thousands, almost 1 million people that viewed this and commented about how they either had the experience or had no idea that this is a phenomenon or it was happening to them. And like many, many years later, and they thought they were weird or something was wrong. So I don't know. It's just like motherhood imprints itself, right? We know from science that there's evidence that physiologically we do change after we have a pregnancy. And it's just so interesting that even lactation just creates this permanency in changing us. And I think it's kind of fun. But obviously the internet really thought it was interesting and it was not without some trolls too. So I may repost this reel just to see who else we can shake loose because I think it's a really fun topic. So Mom's Gone Viral this week is all about ghost boobies. And you know what? There is a link in my show notes that you can text in. And I want to know through that text whether or not you have ever experienced this phenomenon of ghost boobies or if it's all new to you. Let me know. We'll talk about it a little bit more next week. All right, for this last segment, let's jump back to self-advocacy because I care so much about this. And I want to leave you today in this show with something practical you can do, again, in this time where you might just be feeling really overwhelmed, even if it has nothing to do with Washington, D.C. In general, this is just a topic that is near and dear to my heart and is relevant every day of the week in any time. of our country. So that is your rights in the workplace and how to navigate it. And so let's go through that. So the Pump Act, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, many of you are, I know, is your right to break time and a private non-bathroom space to pump at work. This is still alive. This law is still active today. As of today, I have not heard of anything specific that would be rolling that back at all. It applies to most employees, but sometimes your state may offer stronger protections than what the Federal Pump Act says. So definitely worth checking into what your state offers. For instance, it may cover more employers. In the state of New York, they are paying for a pump break, whereas the Pump Act doesn't require you to be paid for those breaks. So the Pump Act is alive and well, and definitely something you should be receiving in your place of employment if eligible, which most of us are, and also can advocate for and work with your employer to get what you need. The other is the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. It's still standing. You have the right to reasonable accommodations at work during pregnancy. You have that right during lactation. It helps extend the Pump Act a bit. So if the Pump Act, where the Pump Act only covers up to a year after birth of a baby for breastfeeding accommodations, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act may provide continued accommodation beyond that period of time for you. It allows for some flexibility in scheduling as needed as accommodation of pregnancy or lactation, as well as like comfortable seating, all the things you can think about, support of your doctor's appointments. So that is out there as well. And this is something to read about. I will link to information that we have, and it may be a useful tool to you. And again, your state may have better protections. So just remember that the federal protections that do exist right now are a minimum standard, but you may have stronger laws in your states. Knowing your rights is step one. Just knowing what's out there and what you're eligible for and entitled to as a worker is the first way to be an advocate. But then those of you who know that Go Ask Your Mothers isn't just a podcast, but was also my first book that launched last August, is still very much relevant today, is that communication with employers is key. My hope is that employers will communicate with you, will initiate that communication. That's what I'm pounding the pavement out there, talking to employers about through the launch of my book, is how managers, bosses, and supervisors can be supportive and make a safe space for you to speak up. Regardless, if you do feel like you can speak up, talk to your management, your boss, whoever is kind of opening the door for you to this support early and often about your needs. I really, really like a transition plan for if you do have any kind of leave, for when you come back from leave, on what their expectations are and what your needs might be. You might not know everything you're going to need, right? Like you may not know if you're going to have postpartum depression, and you might not know how lactation is going to go for you. But I think at least starting the conversations opens up the door to say, hey, I'm going to come back at certain points if there's anything I need. Is that okay? And how do I go about requesting accommodations? I think it's good to start that conversation early and often as well. And, I think instead of saying I need flexibility, I think tie it into work. This is something that I really always emphasize. Think about what your employer's goals are and what your employer's interests are. I mean, they're interested in the bottom line. They're interested in your productivity. So I think saying things like a hybrid schedule would allow me to maintain my workload while balancing my new childcare needs, or would allow me to reach the goals that we have for this quarter, or blocking lactation breaks on my calendar would make sure I can pump without interruption and then be on time to meetings because it'll be all scheduled out in a way that works well for me and also supports getting the job done. Whenever possible, I think framing things in terms of what you need, of course, that's number one, but also what is going to support the end goal for the employer is likely to have a better outcome to your conversation with management. I'm also a big supporter of documenting everything. So whenever you have these conversations, make sure you do a follow-up email afterward that says, thank you so much for that meeting. Here are the 5 things we discussed, just making sure we're on the same page. I think that's so worthwhile, not just because you're trying to sort of catch your boss or anything, or expecting them to not make good on what you discussed. But I think in the end, it's sometimes like a little bit of lost in translation in conversations, or they may hear something different than you hear, or you just may be tired and not wanting to get into a big fight and want to go back to the list from the conversation when you are in that newborn sleep phase. And really, that might be useful to you in the end. And certainly going to be useful to you if there is a legal issue down the road. So document everything you can. At the end of the day, you are your own best self-advocate here. And again, I understand some people cannot take that risk, cannot take that employment risk by speaking up. But if you are in a place where you can advocate for yourself, start that early. Don't wait until you're in dire situation, needing the flexible schedule or support of mental health. Do your best to lay the groundwork for that. But again, going back to the premise of why I wrote the Go Ask Your Mother's book, at the end of the day, I don't believe that this is the employee's burden. I think self-advocacy is important, but I think the burden lies on employers to do the initial first step in paving that road to working mom support. So if you have an employee resource group in your corporation that would be interested in having me come in and talk about that, let's link up and do it. But I, again, am just so thrilled that I've had an opportunity to be in conversation with many employers and will through the rest of this year, because that's who needs the training. That's who we need to get out there and encourage to make the best foot forward for their employees. A few other nuggets of wisdom I really just want to leave you with today to wrap this all up is know your worth. Know your worth. You know, this motherhood penalty is real, but research shows, and I detail this in my book, and it's out there to back you up, that moms are super productive employees. We bring all sorts of value add skills to the table, whether that's executive functioning or negotiation, diplomacy, strong communication. Know your worth. Don't be afraid to advocate for what you need and for fair pay. Also, your boundaries are valid. When it's time to turn off work notifications, when it's time to ask for those accommodations of pregnancy or lactation, set the boundaries. It doesn't make you a difficult person. It makes you a strategic person, someone who is advocating for themselves. And ultimately, the efforts that you're making in your workplace pave the way for the moms that come after you. And I mentioned value add skills. Remember that motherhood, while certain things go to the wayside like sleep, it builds incredible leadership and other skills. So your emotional intelligence is going to skyrocket. You're going to just learn all about crisis management. Use it to your advantage in the workplace. And again, make sure other people recognize this amazing skill set you bring to the table. All right, I covered a lot today. Whew. There's a lot going on. So I'm thinking about you all right now. This is a tough month, one way or another, for a lot of people. I just really encourage you to stay strong. Know that you're not alone. That's a key part of why I wanted to do this podcast and why I like to talk to you on social media and connect with you through my book, and everything that we've got going on is just, I think, creating that community and that sense of validation that no matter what kind of role we play, what level we are at work, whether we're working or not, that we're all kind of in this together, and we're right there with you. So I totally feel you. The call to action, really want you to think about self-advocacy for yourself more than ever before. This is the time to speak up and talk to your employer and tell them what you need. And I would just love to connect with you. So whether that's over on Instagram or any of the platforms that I broadcast this podcast through, my Substack is so much fun. I put up new articles on really interesting topics in motherhood. Just this week, we were talking about support for moms who are jurors and lawyers in the courtroom, and how courts need to do a better job supporting moms. So pop over to Substack and check that out. It's a really interesting topic. If you loved today's episode, would you please share it with another mom who needs to hear it? And don't forget to subscribe, comment, like, all the things. That's how other people find me. I so appreciate you. And with that, I hope we have more great news to report on, especially from the states that are out there working for working moms right now. But for sure, I'll be back here next week with you, and we'll just keep on talking about all things motherhood. So with that, thank you so much, and I wish you an amazing rest of the week.
That's a wrap for this week. Thanks so much for tuning in to Go Ask Your Mothers. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe so you never miss what's next, and share it with a mom who could use a little encouragement. Follow me on Instagram at Sarah Wells Bags for breastfeeding tips, and at Go Ask Your Mothers for working mom life and more. Remember, you're doing better than you think, and you're stronger than you know. Until next time, you've got this, and I've got your back.